هذا كتاب أنزلناه مبارك فاتبعوه واتقوا لعلكم ترحمون.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the tafsir of Imam Sa'di rahimahullah and Surah Al-An'am, and we'll take verse number 95 inshallah. Verse number 95 from Surah Al-An'am. And as you see the ayah in front of us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله فالق الحب والنوى يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله فأنى تؤفكون. Which means, verily it is Allah who causes the seed grain and the fruit stone to split and sprout. He brings forth the living from the dead, and it is He who brings forth the dead from the living. Such is Allah, then how are you deluded away from the truth? Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, he says, يخبر تعالى عن كماله وعظمة سلطانه, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, is informing us about His kamal, His perfectness, and وعظمة سلطانه, and the greatness of His sovereignty subhanahu wa ta'ala, وقوة اقتداره, and the power of His abilities, that al-quwwa is the might and al-qudra is the power. So the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وسعة رحمته, and the spaciousness of His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it encompasses everything. وعموم كرمه, and the general karam and generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that encompasses everything. وشدة عنايته بخلقه, and shidda is the intense, and al-inaya is the taking care of, is the maintenance. بخلقه, towards His creation, that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create His creation and leave them, but rather He is maintaining them. He's taking care of them. إن الله يوسك السماوات والأرض أن تزولا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds the heavens and the earth from falling apart. And when you see here going through the verse, إن الله فالق الحب والنوى, He subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that breaks the seed for the plants to come out from it. So as he mentioned here, this is all about the power of Allah, the mercy of Allah, the authority, the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His generosity subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it comes to that extent of details in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَالِقُ الْحَبِّ, he says, شَامِلٌ لِسَائِرِ الْحُبُوبِ, and shamil, which includes to all of the hubub, all of the different grains, التي يباشر الناس زرعها, the grains that people yubashir, that means they're dealing with it, come from al-bashara, or one skin, that means people are dealing with planting it. والتي لا يباشرونها منها, and also the grains that they don't deal with or they don't plant. كالحبوب التي, like the grains, التي يبثها الله في البراري والقفار, the grains that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يبثها, that means He spread them out in the deserts and in the fields and the jungles everywhere. فيفلق الحبوب عن الزروع. So He فيفلق from al-falaq, which means He splits open these grains that would brings from it az-zuru', the plants, والنوابت, and what planted from it, على اختلاف أنواعها, from its different kinds, وأشكالها, and shapes, ومنافعها, and benefits. You know, this is science by itself. Things that we know and things that we do not know, and how all of them, they come from their grains, their seeds, and how it splits open and how it brings what's in it. All of that is by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it says, Inna Allah. It does not happen by itself. It's all by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَرْتَعُونَ, and these animals and so on, they يَرْتَعُون, that means they go all over the place. فِيمَا فَلَقَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْحَبِّ وَالنَّوَى, in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala split it open from these grains. And these an-nawa is the solid seed in the date palm, and in the dates and the like of this. So whether it's grains or whether it's the seeds of any fruits or the like of this, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the animals and the human beings they eat from it. وَيَقْتَاتُونَ, plural tense here from al-qut is the necessary food, provisions. So present tense وَيَقْتَاتُونَ وَيَنْتَفِعُونَ, and they are benefiting from it. بِجَمِيعِ أَنْوَاعِ الْمَنَافِعِ, with all types and kinds of benefits التي جعلها الله في ذلك, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it in this. And that's it's something to be mentioned, but then the amount of information that human beings get to discover, and the things that is beyond what they ever even think, and how it goes into many different ways and many different benefits, is beyond one's ability to even comprehend. وَيُرِيهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ بِرِّهِ وَإِحْسَانِهِ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make them see from his goodness subhanahu wa ta'ala and his generosity, ما يبهر العقول, what make the minds, instead of being dazzled, ويظهر الفحول, and make the strong men unable to really comprehend it. And الذهول comes from when you're not able to focus on something, when you're diverted away from something because of how overwhelming it is. ويريهم من بدائع صنعته, and he make them see from their the bada'a and the amazing ways of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وكمال حكمته, and the perfect wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ما به يعرفونه. All of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it in such a way for people to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ويوحدونه, and they make the tawheed of Allah in his worship. ويعلمون أنه هو الحق, and they know that he subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. وأن عبادة ما سواه باطلة, and the worship of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is falsehood. So as you see this last statement, this is what the purpose of what's mentioned here. إن الله فارق الحب والنوى. Why? So that people would know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes, and see the perfect creation of Allah that shows the perfect attributes of Allah and his power and so on, as we heard, so that the people would worship him alone subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would disbelieve in anything that is being worshipped besides Allah. And you see how when people associate partners with Allah, worship idols, all of these things, just something like splitting the seeds, splitting the grains, how these idols can do anything. This is all by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the ayah says, يُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ, he brings out the life from the dead. As he says here, كَمَا يُخْرِجُ مِنَ الْمَنِيِّ حَيَوَانًا, as he brings subhanahu wa ta'ala from al-mani, the seminal fluid, حيوان, an animal, or for the human beings, a human being. وَمِنَ الْبَيْضَةِ فَرْخًا, and from the egg, chicken or chicks. وَمِنَ الْحَبِّ وَالنَّوَى زَرْعًا وَشَجَرًا, and from the seeds and the grains, plants and trees. So this is the ikhraj, the act of bringing out, that act itself, and how it's in many different creation of Allah, and it's different from one thing to the other, but it's all by Allah. يخرج الحي من الميت. And also even you would find a human being, a woman, she dies, and then they would get her, she's pregnant and she dies, and the child comes out alive. So يخرج الحي من الميت, bringing the life from the dead. And he mentioned here some other examples. And maniyya is dead, the seminal fluid is dead, and then what comes from it is something that is life. And the egg, brings from it the chicken, and from the grains, the trees and so on. And ومخرج الميت من الحي, ومخرج, and he's the one that brings out the dead from the life. And the dead is وهو الذي لا نمو فيه أو لا روح. There's no growth in it, or there's no soul in it. من الحي, so he brings the dead from the one that is life. كما يخرج من الأشجار والزروع والنوى والحب, as he brings from the trees and the plants, also the seeds and the grains. So the cycle goes back again. ويخرج من الطائر بيضا, and brings from the bird the eggs, and the matter goes back again. So, and the human beings, seminal fluid, so brings the life from the dead and the dead from the life. ذلكم, The one that is like this, الذي فعل ما فعل. This is the one that did what he did. وانفرد بخلق هذه الأشياء. And he's the only one that created these things. وتدبيرها, created it, and the tadbir, maintaining it and continuously maintaining it. Allahu Rabbukum. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord. Allah, what does Allah means? الذي له الألوهية. The one that belongs to him, the him al-uluhiyya, the oneness of worship. وَالْعِبَادَ عَلَى خَلْقِهِ أَجْمَعِينَ, and the worship upon all of his slaves, all of them. وهو الذي ربى جميع العالمين بنعمه. He is ربكم, that means ربى. He's the one that raises all of the creation of Allah with his favors. وغذاهم بكرمه, and he gives them the nutrition and whatever they need by his mercy and generosity subhanahu wa ta'ala. فأنا تؤفكون, as the ayah ends, which means أي فأنا تصرفون. How can you be diverted away from this? وتصدون عن عبادة من هذا شأنه. And you would divert people and oppose people from worshipping the one that this is what he is subhanahu wa ta'ala. إلى عبادة من لا يملك, to make the people worship the ones that لا يملك لنفسه نفعا, does not own any benefit for themselves, nor harm, no death, ولا موتا, ولا حياة, ولا نشورا, and no life and no nushura. So, and this is how it's so amazing how people can turn away from Allah. It's so evil, and it's so amazing how people can see this truth and reflect upon this, and they don't humble themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, as we see here, this is, going from the taqreer and affirming the tawheed of Allah, the oneness of worship of Allah, and the resurrection and the message and all of these things and the admonitions that are mentioned before, to bring these means of evidences of the ayat of Allah, the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is the only one worthy of worship. Because no one has the right to be worshipped when this is how the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So how evil and how ridiculous and foolish it is to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we see, tu'fakun, that means tusrafun, turned away, which basically make you ungrateful to the favor of Allah. And it shows in it that the believers they're not like this. So they're grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah faliqul habbi wan nawa. And as we said, al-falq is the split of things, right? And this is the act that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his action subhanahu wa ta'ala. And al-hab is all the different grains, and al-nawa is all different seeds, right? And يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي. Right, so this is sentence and this is sentence, right? Because it's the opposite of it, and yukhrij, which means this is another creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one creation of Allah, another creation of Allah. So as you see here, this is one creation, yukhrij al-hayya min al-mayyit. This is one power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you have another act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is وَمُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتِ مِنَ الْحَيِّ. So this is one thing after the other. The first sentence someone might ask, the first one, يخرج الحي من الميت, this is a جملة فعلية, this is a verb, and then the other one, مخرج, a noun, another verb, right? So the يخرج, the first one, the جملة الفعلية, if it's a verb, then it gives the meaning of something that is being repeated, and it keeps on happening constantly. Right? And then when it comes to mukhrij, which is the noun, that gives the meaning of the steadiness, right? So then when you put these two together, that means the matter is repeated and the matter is steady. So because one is in need of the other. So and it shows that both of them are like this, not one and not the other. So as a result of that, فَأَنَّ تُؤْفَكُونَ, how can you turn away from such amazing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to that level of details, that the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that many people do not think of. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who are humble to the creation, to the creator subhanahu Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make us always in state of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have any questions, again, it's brief, and also I apologize for last night. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy, inshallah. The attendance code is عبادة, or if you like to challenge yourself, يخرج الحي من الميت. ما شاء الله. So this is the attendance code إن شاء الله. طيب, forgive me والله because of the differences of time and the salah, and hopefully inshallah ta'ala tonight we'll meet inshallah, unlike last night, so you can have the questions then inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you steadfastness and all of us to be consistent in the durus inshallah, and to try all of us to benefit inshallah. Barakallahu fikum wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.